trying to deliver tangible benefits to citizens in order to gain legitimacy in that way. The problem with that at the moment is, what we've seen in the last decade at least, is relatively low economic growth. In fact, in some countries, economic stagnation, basically. Look at a country like Italy, for instance. Also, a whole myriad of new social problems that national politicians seem to fail to have good answers, good solutions to, and which the EU promises apparently solutions for, but fails really to deliver. So in that context, policy performance isn't enough. So democratic accountability, and the missing democratic accountability within that system, is becoming increasingly problematic, basically. The EU has created a set of winners and losers in which then policy performance can't be enough to rely on for legitimation. To get even more conceptual for a minute, though, you can think about political constitutionalism as equating to the notion of popular sovereignty. That's the notion, fundamentally, that all power derives from the people and is exercised in their name. That, of course, is the leitmotif of the great democratic revolutions of the 18th century. The US Revolution, the French Revolution. Obviously, the Marquis de Lafayette having a big role in both of these. That's why it was such a pleasure to come and talk here as well. I love that connection. And that's the principle as well. Popular sovereignty is the principle on which parliaments are fundamentally based. What is a parliament, basically? A parliament is an assembly of the representatives of the people. The people are too numerous to congregate together in one place and decide on law, policy matters together. So what you need to do is, you need to filter them out through representation and bring them together. That's what a parliament traditionally is for. That's problematic in a certain case, though, and that case is when there's not a unified concept of the people to actually represent in the first place. In that context, having a directly elected parliament is going to be highly contested as a mechanism for political constitutionalism. For injecting some mobilization of citizens, injecting majoritarianism is going to be very difficult to do in a parliamentary fashion when you think of different peoples as constituting the public sphere, basically. So that's the case in a federation, or even in a regional association of states. In those contexts, the territorial units, they don't want to see separation of powers issues resolved by a popular majority in a parliament. They want to retain some autonomy over that. They prefer a variety of elite deals. They're wary of majoritarianism, basically. So what's interesting in that perspective, once we identify that problem within the EU, is we can take a more comparative perspective. It's not alone in facing this tension between, on the one hand, a democratic imperative of popular sovereignty, having all power derived from the people, and at the same time resisting parliamentarization, because units in these federations want to retain a certain degree of autonomy. They're wary of majorities coming from outside. And that's the case of both the US and Switzerland, historically. They had to resolve that balancing act by introducing political constitutionalism by means other than parliamentarization. They didn't resolve these questions through a parliament, through parliamentary processes. So how did they do it? In the US, what they did, I would say, is through presidentialization. Compare that with Switzerland, and what you saw in Switzerland was direct democracy. Putting vote out directly to the people. So what I want to do now in terms of the presentation is take it to the idea about how those processes for instigating political constitutionalism worked in the Swiss and the American cases, and try to talk about how they might be adapted to fit in with the EU. So let's start with the case you should be most familiar with, which is US presidentialization. Here I have to apologize as well, because what I'm going to give you is a rather bastardized, shortened version of American political development, basically. So if you think back to 1789, think back at the outset about what the presidency was going to be all about. The presidency was certainly not expected at the outset to resolve important separation of powers issues. It wasn't supposed to have a popular mandate either. Separation of powers issues are going to be resolved by the interplay between the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. The President is a figurehead for coordinating the action of the government that is going to be a figurehead appointed and elected from amongst the best men in the country. Not going to be a popularity contest, not going to be a beauty contest. That breaks down though, that doesn't actually hold, because political constitutionalism basically emerges through presidentialization. And in particular, I would say it's associated with this character, Andrew Jackson. President elected obviously in 1828. In 1824, he actually wins already a plurality of votes, but loses out in the presidency, plurality of votes in Electoral College, that is. He loses out to John Quincy Adams. And Jackson is a very interesting character. First of all, he wouldn't like me talking in front of you today. He was a virulent anti-British character, yeah? In the 19th century, that was a typically common American position, yeah? That's fortunately a tradition, I would say, that's been lost in America. But he was one of these characters who was virulently anti-British. He was also virulently democratic, in a sense anti-aristocratic. Him and his sidekick, Martin Van Buren, they basically create the Democratic Party to seize the presidency and to use that to basically destroy what he thinks as is the Virginia aristocracy that controls the major institutions of the federal government. One of the reasons then they're able to do this, there are a whole host of them, socio-economic amongst others, but one of the key reasons they're able to do that, presidentialization, turning it into a popularity contest, in a sense, is because of a change in the nature of how the Electoral College is selected in the 1820s. Originally, it's state legislatures that just appoint the Electoral College electors. But by the 1820s, there's a real grassroots democratic movement that Jackson really contributes to and tries to foster, to change that into direct election, obviously by white men, at the state level, to create really a popular bond across the whole country between citizens and the president. And that's how this political constitutionalism really emerges in this context. You have a presidency and a mass party system that become key to resolving, negotiating a variety of constitutional issues, particular separation of powers issues. So for instance, 1832, Jackson is faced with this crucial problem about South Carolina trying to unilaterally nullify a federal law which imposes a tariff on manufactured goods from abroad. Perfectly constitutional, that's the Constitution says the federal government has that, but South Carolina claims that's a deliberate hit against the plantation economy of South Carolina and tries to nullify that. What happens is Jackson uses his popularity, uses his personal bond with the people who've elected him through this Democratic Party system to basically browbeat South Carolina into submission over that. And later on, throughout this period, just before the Civil War basically erupts, the second party system, that's the party system between the Democrats on the one hand and the Whigs, becomes key to resolving constitutional issues that keeps the Union together, in fact. In a certain sense, the Union lasts longer than it would have done otherwise. Resolves things like the annexation of Texas, resolves things like the problem of what to do with all the new territory acquired from Mexico after the war with Mexico. Those things are resolved through the presidency's popularity in a certain sense and the party system. That's not undisputed though. The point is that is seen very much as an innovation, a centralizing majoritarian or stealthily majoritarian innovation that is seen as controversial, in particular by proponents of states' rights, proponents in a certain sense of an originalist version or reading of the US Constitution, particularly thinking of John Calhoun, who non-coincidentally is from South Carolina. He sees the rise of someone like Jackson, the rise of parties, as a perversion of the original Constitution. The popular presidency is a perversion in his term. He thinks you need to bring power back, not to the presidency, but to the peoples of the individual states. Doesn't believe in the fact that the president can represent a united people at the actual national